One of Georgia's biggest problems from this past season was their inability to run the football. They just couldn't do it. It was completely unacceptable what happened to Georgia's running game this season. And Kirby Smart talked about that at the end of their season after their loss to Notre Dame in the Sugar Bowl. I'm going to talk about that and break down what he said. And we're going to talk about how things need to change and what Georgia can do to get back to what they want to do, which is run the football and run through defenses on a consistent basis. It just did not happen last year. Georgia just averaged 124 rushing yards per game. That's 102nd in the country in rush yards per game. Completely unacceptable for a team that, normally has their way on the ground. They produce outstanding running backs, and I don't think it was all a running back issue. I think a lot of it was the offensive line. Again, we're going to break down all of this. But 85th nationally in yards per carry. They rushed for just 1,742 total rushing yards in 14 games. That is 14th in the SEC. They were first in that category last year. So again, a complete failure if we're going back and looking at the problems that this team had. They couldn't run the football, and that was a big reason why they lost 3 games and did not accomplish their ultimate goal. But here's what Kirby Smart had to say about the lack of running game they had this season. He said, I attribute it to, number one, some really good defenses. I'm going to talk about that in just a second, too. He said, I wrote that wrong. He said, we've had a rotating lineup on the offensive line with guys who have rolled in and out, and we haven't created the same thing on defense we have in the past. If you go to years past defenses, we created more turnovers, better third downs to get the ball back to the offense. There's a lot of things we can do better to help our offense, but we certainly have to play better and do better. And a lot of that has to do with health and the schedule we played and having some playmakers that can make some plays too. Now, we'll talk about the offensive line quickly because coming into the season, that was a group that a lot of people were really excited about, and I thought could be one of the strengths of the team, right? You had a returning starter at left tackle, Ernest Guerrino, I thought would take a big step forward. Dylan Fairchild, who has announced that he has plans to enter the NFL draft. He was a multi-year starter who came back, an experienced veteran at left guard. You had Jared Wilson, who patiently waited behind Cedric Van Pran coming into the season. A lot of people thought he could be one of the best centers in the SEC, and I thought he was okay this year. He has also just accepted his invitation to the Senior Bowl, so he will be gone. Tate Ratledge, team captain, multi-year starter at right guard. And then at right tackle, you had Xavier Truss, who's, again, been on the team forever. And Monroe Freeling, a promising, 5-star tackle who played some on the left side. So too many injuries and just not enough continuity. I remember watching against Notre Dame, they would have their speedy edge outside linebackers play that 5 technique right outside the tackles, and they would stunt inside. And there were multiple times where that got to Georgia, and they were able to get into the backfield. Those stunts, those twists from those speedy, long, athletic pass rushers and defenders that Notre Dame had, they gave Georgia absolute fits. They'd come off tackle, right outside, stunt their way in and find their way through the tackle on the guard. That happened just too many times. And, if you go back and look at the Ole Miss game, they just didn't play well at all. There was a viral clip of 5 Georgia offensive linemen just missing their guy. And when you're barely trying to get 2 to 3 yards, right? Nate Frazier and Trevor Etienne, I'm going to talk about their numbers in a second, but they ran for about 5 yards a carry. When you include all the sacks and stuff, I think, it's worse than that, but too many times they just couldn't get through the line, and they were stopped at the line of scrimmage, 1-yard gain, 2-yard gain. There were no explosives at all, at least from the running backs. I think the biggest carry, I thought I had it written down. I think came from Anthony Evans, a 50-yard run. I think that was the longest run of the season. I could be wrong. Meant to look that up. I didn't. So I could be wrong. But no explosiveness was huge. But going back to the offensive line, it just felt like every once in a while someone would just completely whiff. Right off the snap, just miss their guy, and they make a play in the backfield, right? So even if you can hold on to your block for just a second or two, that makes things so much easier. But every once in a while, someone, has bad footwork, or, they just don't execute what their job was on that particular play, and they let guys through easily into the backfield. So it's tough to get in those positions. And again, you saw promise from Nate Frazier, and you saw promise from Etienne. Those are good backs. Now, Nate Frazier was just a freshman, right? Ball security was an issue, and Trevor Etienne was banged up basically for most of the season. He had the broken ribs against Florida and kind of gutted it out. But as far as the teams that they've played, Kirby Smart talked about, hey, we played a lot of good defenses. Let's go over that real quick. Ole Miss is tied for first in the country in rushing defense. So I get it. Georgia could not run on Ole Miss. Not many could. Tennessee is 10th in the country in rushing defense. Texas was 15th. Auburn was 27th. Georgia Tech was 30th. And Notre Dame was 34th. So they did go up against some really good run defenses. But, part of me thinks at the same time, were these defenses really good, or did we just see bad offensive play from a lot of teams in the SEC? I mean, offensive football was somewhat abysmal across college football, especially in the SEC. So were these defenses really good, or were a lot of these offenses just taking a step back, right? We definitely saw that from Georgia. I mean, the offensive line, these guys are, a lot of them, veterans, experienced, multi-year starters, and they just didn't have a lot of chemistry going on. And yes, it was a revolving door. Guys are moving all over the place. But injuries happen in football. You still have to find a way to be consistent, and they couldn't do it. Nate Frazier ended the season with 671 rushing yards, 8 touchdowns. He had one 100-yard game where he went for 136 and 3 touchdowns. That was against UMass. Cupcake. They don't matter. That game doesn't matter. Who cares? Trevor Etienne had 609 rushing yards, 9 touchdowns. Only one Georgia running back went over 100 yards this year. And again, it doesn't matter. It was against UMass. Nobody cares. That can't happen. Especially, because Georgia fans are not used to this, right? 6 years ago now, 7, they saw Nick Chubb, Sony Michel run through college football on their way to, to the national championship game. So they saw those guys. They saw DeAndre Swift, James Cook, Zamir White, Kenny McIntosh made a lot of plays. And I'm not trying to throw the running backs under the bus, but they just weren't as talented there. There's talent, and they did their best. I really do think that, but it wasn't enough. They weren't deep enough. Didn't have Roger Robinson, didn't have Branson Robinson. And after those two, you did have Cash Jones, but he was kind of more of a receiving weapon than actually a running back out of the backfield if you go and dig into the numbers. But just can't happen. But I will throw this out to Trevor Etienne, because I saw some Etienne slander on one of these videos. And I couldn't believe it. Dude was banged up, and I know he missed game 1 to an offseason arrest. That's on him. Can't happen to a captain, right? Which is what he was even before his first game. But 94 yards at Texas with 2 touchdowns. That was his season high. His was 94. On the road at Texas, at Texas was 87 and 3 touchdowns. He had 94 and 2 touchdowns against Texas in Atlanta. So either way, when Georgia played Texas, Trevor Etienne brought it, and he came to play. And so you have to like the grit and the toughness those guys had, but there just weren't any holes to run through. And again, I thought the tackles just weren't consistent because they weren't there for such a long time. You had guys just playing all over the place, and they had some issues with some of the speed that they saw on the outside and the stunts and the twist. They just didn't bring it, and they don't have an elite left tackle. They normally do. Georgia's been providing or producing elite left tackles. Even right tackles are getting drafted in the NFL out of Georgia, and I don't think there's a first-round offensive lineman on the roster. We haven't been able to say that in a while, right? So just about every year we're seeing a Georgia Bulldog lineman come off in the first round. It's because that group's been really good, and they don't have that type of guy, or they didn't this past year. Someone has to emerge. Monroe Freeling has the potential, but he was not very good against Notre Dame. So he needs that offseason to get better. Micah Morris will be an experienced veteran. I expect him to take over at left guard. Center is up for grabs. Drew Bobo, someone else. Someone's got to emerge. And then right tackle, right guard, we'll see where things go. Ernest Green is coming back for another year. So there's guys who should be able to emerge. But at the end of the day, if you can't run the football, you're not going to win a whole lot of games. And Georgia, in the 3 losses, they weren't able to run the ball much, really at all. I think, I don't know the numbers in Tuscaloosa, but couldn't get it going. They had to rely on Carson Beck to throw them back into the game. Against Ole Miss, couldn't do anything on the ground. Against Notre Dame, couldn't do much there either. Actually, they didn't do anything. So can't happen at a place like Georgia where they produce outstanding offensive linemen, tight ends, running backs, year after year after year. And I know Kendall Milton and Dejan Edwards didn't. I don't know if they're in the NFL yet or not. Maybe a practice squad, maybe a third, fourth round or depth chart type of guy. And then just there's been a talent drop off there at running back, and they need to find guys. There's no doubt about it. So we'll see where things go. It's hard to expect much from Roderick Robinson next year and Branson Robinson. They need Trevor Etienne back. Right now, I think he will be back for next year. Got to hold on to Nate Frazier. I know that sounds crazy to a lot of people, but you never know with the portal. And it wouldn't surprise me if the kid from California is offered a bigger NIL package to maybe play a little closer to home, that he would possibly look at that opportunity. So Georgia's got to keep him on board. Etienne and Frazier next year to go along with maybe another back, maybe a healthy Roderick Robinson, Dwight Phillips Jr., Chauncey Bowens. Maybe things get a little better. They can't get a whole lot worse because, again, 102nd nationally in rushing yards per game, 85th nationally in yards per carry. It was bad. It was bad on the ground. Georgia's got to get it fixed. Still a problem they need to address. They addressed wide receiver, and I think they could get more good news there soon, but they really have to find something, whatever it is, to get that running game going because it was bad this year. Kirby Smart knows it. He's got to address it. We'll see what happens there. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you over on the website.